All right, section 6.5, we're talking about indirect proof and inequalities in one triangle. In this lesson, we're talking about just looking about the sides, the angles, in one single triangle. In the next section, we'll get into multiple triangles. Okay, so our objective is to first write an indirect proof. We're going to learn about indirect proofs today. List sides and angles of a triangle in order by size. Use the triangle inequality theorem to find possible side lengths of a triangle. Okay. Hey, so first, an indirect proof. Okay, so I'm going to grab a Post-it. If you don't have one, go grab one. Okay. Indirect proof is a new type of reasoning. Okay, where we actually prove it what we call indirectly, not a straight line way. Okay. For example, if we wanted to prove, it's used a lot in law. Okay, let's say I wanted to prove some guy named Jim. Let's say he murdered somebody. Okay, this is used a lot in law and order crimes. Let's say Jim murdered, I don't know, his wife. Okay, so if I want to prove that Jim murdered his wife, okay, what a indirect proof would do is his lawyer would, the person trying to accuse him would be like, all right, we're trying to prove he's guilty. So what we're trying to prove, so we have all kinds of stuff that's given. We have a whole bunch of given information. But what we're trying to prove is he did it. Okay. So what an indirect proof does is his lawyer would say, okay, let's assume for a minute. Let's assume Jim didn't do it. Okay. So let's assume Jim didn't do it. Okay. So then we say, okay, well, if he didn't do it, okay, then that means what? Well, if he didn't do it, I don't know, let's say he was murdered at home. Okay, so let's assume that he didn't do it. And then we would list things that he was doing until we reach a contradiction. Let's assume he didn't do it. Okay, well, if he didn't do it, well, then he wouldn't have access to a gun. Well, let's say, okay, he shot her. Okay, we're getting really morbid here. Okay, but let's say he shot her with a gun that was his. Okay, well, let's assume Jim didn't do it. Well, if he didn't do it, well, then his fingerprints wouldn't be on the gun. Okay, well, if he didn't do it, well, then his fingerprints wouldn't be on the gun. Well, let's say we send it to the lab and boom, his fingerprints are on the gun. So there, we've contradicted this statement. We said, well, there'd be no fingerprints. Okay, and we're like, yes, there are. So that's what we call a contradiction. It contradicted what we set up here, that there would be no fingerprints. Oh, there are. His fingerprints are on it. So we've contradicted. So then this assumption that we made up here, that he didn't do it, that would say that this assumption is false. So our previous assumption was false, so therefore he did do it. Okay? So that's what we call an indirect proof. Okay? We start with this assumption here, where it's like, all right, let's play the devil's advocate. Let's say that, what we're trying to prove is we'll just basically flip it and negate that statement. Okay? So those are the steps to an indirect proof. So first, we want to identify the statement you're trying to prove. What do you want to prove? Okay. So, and then assume temporarily that the statement is false by assuming that the opposite is true. Basically, then you reason logically until we reach a contradiction. So then we point out that contradiction, so therefore our desired conclusion must be true. Okay. So for example, here's example 1. Write an indirect proof that a given triangle there can be at most one right triangle. Okay, so if we go ahead, and I'm just going to draw a triangle. So here's my given triangle. I have a triangle ABC. It could be any random triangle. So any given triangle, we want to prove that ABC can have at most, so that's no more than one right triangle. And we're going to do this in a paragraph proof. So first, we want to identify what we're trying to prove. We're trying to prove it can have at most one right triangle. And then assume that its opposite is true. So instead of saying it can have no more or at most one right triangle, let's assume it has two. So let's assume triangle ABC has two right angles. Well, that's more than one. Has two right angles. We'll go angle A and angle B. Okay. Well, if angle A and angle B are right angles, well then, what do we know? The measure of angle A is 90 and the measure of angle B is 90. Okay. Well, we know by the triangle, the triangle angle sum theorem. We know by the triangle angle sum theorem, the measure of angle A plus measure of angle B plus measure of angle C has to be 180, meaning we add up all the angles, we get 180. Well, using substitution, we know the measure of angle A is 90, plus the measure of angle B is 90, plus the measure of angle C has to be 180. Well, 90 plus 90, 180, plus the measure of angle C equals 180. Well, we subtract 180 from each side here, we get the measure of angle C equals 0. Okay. Oop, there's a contradiction here. So we've arrived at a contradiction. Well, because an angle be 0 degrees? Okay. We've contradicted the fact that this is a triangle. Because if it's a triangle, then all of these angles have to be greater than 0. Okay, the measure of angle C can't be 0. So we've arrived at a contradiction, so our previous assumption is false. Our previous assumption, what I mean by our previous assumption is this bit right there. That previous assumption is false. And triangle ABC has at most one right angle. Okay, so we reach that bit of a contradiction. Okay. Okay. Another example of a indirect proof. Okay, so another real life example of an indirect proof. Okay, so let's say I'm trying to, let's try to prove that the basketball game for today was canceled. Okay, that's what we're trying to prove. Okay, I'm trying to prove the basketball game for today was canceled. There's two ways of doing it. I could prove it directly. Okay, basically that would be check my voicemail for the school reach. Okay, that would be very direct. I could check my voicemail for the school reach, and the school reach would be like, yep, the basketball game for today has been canceled. Okay, the indirect way would be to, well, I could go to the gym. And notice, oh, all the basketball players are at practice. Meaning, I could be like, okay, let's assume the game today wasn't canceled. So if the game today wasn't canceled, I could go to the gym and watch it. Okay, so we're assuming the basketball game wasn't canceled. Well, I could go to the gym and watch it. And then I notice, wait a second, all the basketball players are at practice. If all the basketball players are at practice, oh, that means that the basketball game for today was canceled because they wouldn't all be at practice. Okay, so that's an indirect proof. We reached a contradiction there. But, oh, there is a game. Well, then I actually get down there and find out there's not. Okay, that is an indirect proof. Okay, so you assume it's false to start. You assume the opposite statement and then go from there. Okay, all right.